We are live.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Atomics Founder Hacks podcasts, where we share something we've seen, something we've read, and something we've learned that's been a source of inspiration for ourselves or the founders that we're working with. Let's kick off by welcoming, first of all, the gorgeous Mr. Anthony Enright.
Hello.
And the delectable Mr. Alex Moore.
Hello. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, both. So, I'm kicking us off today, again with something I've seen. So let's just jump straight into it, shall we? And my scene this week really is something I've seen certainly in a number of businesses, actually, in the stories that I'm hearing people tell, which I guess you could say is, what does it feel like after the Blitz? You've seen what I'd call this sort of Blitz spirit in a lot of businesses. We've all been doing more. We've been going the extra mile. We've been pushing forwards. People have been doing amazing things during the really tough times we've had through COVID. And I guess the question that's starting to form in my mind is what happens next? Do you know what I mean? It's almost, I'm a great believer that people follow narratives in their lives and tell themselves little stories. And this has been a story of heroism, of people doing amazing things, of course, in the context of a lot of sadness. And I'm just really curious about what happens next in that story. You know, it's usually the end of the film, isn't it? We all celebrate and go, hooray, we've won, you know, we've come through to the next thing. But of course, I just don't know if we know what's next. So I guess, the questions I kind of come up with is so actually what happens next culturally? How do we lead through this? How do we lead into what follows this period of intense heroism? Maybe it's about saying thank you. Maybe it's about helping manage our teams through that change. But it is that fundamental question, what as leaders in businesses, what happens after we come through this sort of blitz spirit? How do we lead into what's next? So there it is. It's a bit of an abstract one, but I'm seeing it in a lot of different businesses. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who'd like to kick us off? Who'd like to give me a sense of that? Mr. Enright, please go ahead.
You can look at this from a number of different angles, can't you, in different perspectives, depending on, I think it's all dependent on what your experience has been to date. And so, because it could sound quite glib if I started talking about certain organisations and what I see them doing next. And actually, if you've gone through, and that generally is those that haven't been overly affected, where actually their business is continuing to grow, and the only real effect is that the teams are working remotely. I think where you've been in a situation where business has been heavily hit because of this, because of the line of business that you're in, I do think it's different. So I think it's, what do you do next? I think ultimately depends on what you've been through so far. However, what I am seeing within a cross-section of businesses, whether they've been hit really hard or whether they have actually enjoyed some quite good times, trading times during this, is looking for that alignment and that kind of spirit around coming together, because you're never going to have this, these opportunities only come up, they don't come up very often. And where I'm at with advising the businesses that we advise and that I work with is that there's a book out there that I talk a lot about called Scaling Up. And it talks about how you align your team around what you're trying to achieve on a quarter-by-quarter basis. And it talks about themes. What's the theme in your business for this quarter, to align everybody around a theme and around something fun, where everybody comes together and works does their bit toward the end goal of that theme. And what I talk a lot to people about at the moment is we don't need a theme at the moment, right? We've got our theme. It's out there. So how do you bring your team together? How do you assure your team that there's a future for your team? Because actually magical things can happen when you really bring a team together who are in the trenches, that feel that they've got their backs against the wall. But actually leaders need to come forward and paint that picture and show what it looks like when you come out of the trench, when you step over the top. And you've got to be clear, you're not 100% sure what it looks like, but you've got a good idea. And to lead those teams and to give them the opportunity to come forward and really step up, jump out of that trench and go forward together to achieve something quite special. My own experience of coming out of recessions in the past and dealing with really hard times is there's that real bond around the people that are able to do that. And you might not work together anymore, but when you meet up, you'll talk about that time or that moment when you all came together and you really had that need to achieve something collectively. And I think that can really, I think it can really set people up for their future. I think they can hold on to this moment now by not walking away, not quitting. Seeing yourself through this can really be something that you'll talk about on your deathbed. I know that sounds a bit over the top, but I really think it's that much of an opportunity at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, what really resonates there is that honesty and vulnerability, actually, that it's okay as the leader to say, I don't know what it's going to be like next, but we're going to go there together. Rather lovely. Alex, what were your thoughts?
Well, that's what I wanted to pick up on. You talked about, the end of the Blitz, the bombs, they stopped falling, and end of the war, and hooray, and there's a big party. I think that's what's lacking in the world at the moment. Okay, the Armageddon scenario did not happen, right? We are out of the bunkers, but the war is not over. I don't really like war analogies. I don't know why I keep using them, but we are still in this situation. There's so much uncertainty. It's not over, and we're on this sort of no man's land, and the businesses I'm connected to and the founders I'm working with right now. There's so much uncertainty. There is an enormous amount of opportunity, and it's how fast do you put the pedal to the metal now? Do you jump on these and go, yeah, great, I can finally see some light at the end of the tunnel. There are some fantastic deals to be had. There are the landscape is changing at this enormous pace. Do I go for it, or is it going to get worse? Am I going to be locked up again in another 3 months? Are all the governments of the world going to become bankrupt because all the debt they are piling on? Who the hell is going to pay for all this debt? There is so much uncertainty out there. It is the sort of Blitz after the Blitz, but it's after the Blitz, but it's not the end of the war. And I think that's the real challenge. And I think those people, I'll be talking about this later about ambition. I think those people with some ambition and a little bit of taking a little bit of a risk now could really capitalize on what's going on. And I think that's the interesting thing, that thin line for, shall I go for it? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? Are the opportunities that are out there now the best they're going to be? Especially in the restaurant industry, it's really interesting, some of the deals out there in terms of property. Will they get any better than they are now? And nobody knows. I think that's the thing. In a few years, people will go, yeah, I took that big, bold decision, and yeah, it's fantastic. Or I took this big, bold decision and it killed me. I don't know. Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
It's a fascinating area, isn't it? And I really hear what you're saying, both of you, in terms of, yes, there's a huge situational component to this, and of course, different businesses and organizations have been affected profoundly differently. Different individuals have been affected differently, and I'm sure we've all seen on LinkedIn the little green rims on people's profile pictures which say, I've been made redundant because of COVID, or I'm now out of work, and I'm just filled with empathy for those people in terms of who've really struggled. And at the same time, it's very hard, perhaps morally, to reconcile with, and we do have to have that eye on the future. And maybe a metaphor for it is, I read something recently that said actually now perhaps the correct moral response for us is safe participation rather than abstinence from being in the world and getting involved. We have to move. We have to start moving again as a society and an economy. And the sort of moral imperative is to participate, to go and eat out, to help out, to go and spend a bit of money and get involved. But do so really safely in this new way. And maybe there's a metaphor there for what we should be looking to do with our businesses is to begin participating again, but do so safely. Very complex issue. Thank you, gentlemen. You've given me lots to think about there. It's very good. Shall we move on? And I think, Anthony, you've got some reading for us this week, which sounds really interesting.
So it's a book called Factfulness, and it's by a gentleman and his family, actually. Hans, it's either Rosling or Rowling. Forgive the pronunciation. I don't know how to correctly pronounce it. Now, I have to caveat this by saying this book was written before COVID. However, I still don't think the principles will have changed. And it's ultimately about, we talk a lot, and Alex, it's something that you always mention and bring up, is that about data driving decisions and data trumping opinion. And what this book is talking about is, and actually the footnote to the book is 10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. And it's ultimately challenging the thought process that in the world we think things are way worse than they were 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years ago. And actually putting data against to prove that that is just not the case anymore. You know, people are living longer. People aren't dying from the things that they died from before. People aren't living, not as many people are living in the poverty that they were before. And it's not trying to underplay the fact that there are still some quite catastrophic things that are happening in the world, and there are people still living in poverty, and children are dying of malnutrition. So it's not saying that these things aren't happening. It's just using the data to say, guys, before you make an opinion on something, pick up the data, look at the data, analyze the data, and you'll learn that whilst there are still some quite horrendous things that are happening, life is better than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We are progressing, we are moving on. And I just love it because it brings up so many things for me, and especially at the moment, right? Because it talks about how the media use a certain graph or a certain type of data set in order to drive what they report upon. And actually, but you've got to dig into that. You've got to look at what's the basis for that graph, the basis for that, and then draw your own conclusion. And the conclusion generally is that, you know, the media outlets, they've got to make news, and negative news, bad news makes, you know, more people are attracted to it than they are good news stories. So I think it really resonated with me and brought up a lot of questions, about use the data. You know, you're making any decision, what's the data? What's the data? What's the data? Data trumps opinion. And also, life isn't as bad, even in the current situation, than is being reported or than we feel it is. And whilst obviously data sets at the moment, I think country by country and infection rates, et cetera, are skewed, you know, look at other data to drive what's happening, and you'll get your answer then, and you'll then know, you know, the next steps you should make. So I just thought it brought up a number of different things. And I think, Alex, you've actually read this as well, haven't you, in the past?
Yeah, I loved it. I loved this book. I loved him, actually. Sadly, he's died. Did you know that, Anthony?
No, I didn't. No.
He died. Yeah. He's an amazing man. I love it when he talks about sword swallowing, and you know, he's just such a cool dude. And I've seen him on TED Talk, and I've seen him on YouTube, and I just think he had this wonderful attitude towards life and a positivity towards it, and he had such enthusiasm for data. You know, which I just love. I love seeing. I don't really care what it is, but when someone's into something, it's infectious. Even if it's something, you know, who gets so excited about data? But the way he seeing somebody who loves doing what they're doing and they communicate so well was a real pleasure, and that's what made me read the book. And I think it's a wonderful book. I've seen some reviews about it saying it's very it's overly optimistic and it doesn't talk about anything bad. But God, you know, I feel like it's a great book to read. I found it was a great book for me to read when I was feeling a bit down, because if you do read, like you're talking about, Anthony, the media and the news and the way the news is set up to focus on the bad, And when you think that incremental, tiny changes and improvements in life, it's not really news, but it's incredible what's going on in the world in terms of progress. He talks about life in Sweden, and Sweden's a highly developed country now, and he was talking about the path that all the other countries are on, and how the fact that they will all get there, and how much better people's lives become as a result. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think if a founder's feeling a bit down, it's a great book to pick up and feel positive about the long-term view of humans and the world. It's yeah, good one. I'm a big fan. Ben, have you read it yet? Are you as cool as me and Anthony?
I'm not as cool as you, but I know that anyway. So, but I'm sure it won't surprise you to say I hugely get the concept, and I think there's some powerful learns in it for anyone who's involved in running or leading a business. And I mean, the two things that straight away that come up for me is that I think it's really similar in business as in life. That business is often a story about incremental improvement, and it's only when you look back over a significant chunk of time and look at that data, you sometimes appreciate the progress you're making and give yourself that permission to feel a bit proud of what you've created, and recognize that you've made some progress. I think it's really powerful. I am tempted to share a little story about the media. Just years ago, when I had PR training with a former Daily Mail journalist, and this journalist said to us, if you want to understand the media, here's how you do it. He said, on my first day as a fresh-faced graduate journalist working for the paper, he said to his editor, what do you want me to write about? And his editor said, well, I want you to picture a middle-aged man who drives a mid-range car. He lives in a sort of mid-range house. He earns a middle income. And I want him to pick up the paper and go, oh my God, look at what they're doing now. And I think whenever we look at the media, we have to remember that that is what the media wants to do. They want to sell papers to people. And these days, increasingly, sadly, I think it's mostly by making them angry. And the way to make people angry is to convince them that things are getting worse. And I think it just shifts the whole attitude. And perhaps another learn for businesses is what is the attitude we take around creating change in the world? Do we take the attitude that we are fixing what is bad and wrong with our businesses? Or do we take the attitude that we are heading towards something better, more attractive, and an improvement? So it's I'll be running away from what is bad or running towards what is better, and I certainly prefer the latter attitude. We sell our teams a vision of how the future can be and that it's a better future. We don't rubbish what we've achieved so far in terms of moving forwards. So yeah, I think very powerful. Thank you, Anthony, for bringing it.
So Alex, it's over to you, I believe, with the next area, the next section.
Yeah, the learned. So my learned this week is all about ambition, founders and ambition. So I touched upon this earlier, and I just thought it was a very interesting topic for us to talk about today, is the ambition of a founder and what a vital part of a founder's sort of capabilities is to have a measure of ambition. So I'm involved in on the front seat of stitching together quite a lot of deals at the moment doing different businesses, and I've just seen that the founder's ambition seems to, the more ambitious a founder is, the more likely they are to jump on some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves. And I was just thinking, and founders who aren't so ambitious are maybe sidestepping some big decisions. And it just makes me think of, the joys, the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur. You've got the ultimate entrepreneur, Elon Musk, who has doubled down every single massive investment he's made. He's then put it all on black and all gone for the next one and the next one. He's just doubled up every time. Probably the most ambitious man on the planet at the moment. And, it's probably why he's going to end up living on Mars one day. But, it's quite interesting. And I just wanted to throw this out to you guys, really, to talk about it this week, is ambition and the role ambition plays. How ambitious? Can you be too ambitious? Can you not be ambitious enough? Is there a Goldilocks thing here? And, should ambition be creating a huge company, making loads of money, or is it, is an ambition? Maybe we could talk about, it's the ambition to have a nice life as a founder. I don't know. I wanted to throw that one out to you two guys. So who would like to go first? Ben.
I'll go. 'Cause I think this is really interesting because I agree that ambition is incredibly powerful, but I think it begs a really important question, which is ambitious for what? And I think that's got to be a huge differentiator, right? I think we've talked before about, we have seen people who get into business purely ambitious to make a lot of money, and it doesn't always work that well when it comes time to then lead a team to realizing a vision, but they don't really have a vision. It's just make me rich, and that doesn't always work. It does sometimes, sadly. it can still work quite well. So I think there's a big question about ambitious for what. At the same time, I have to agree that you wouldn't do this if you didn't have some ambition, and whether that's about putting a dent in the universe, using the Steve Jobs phrase, or about creating something that you can be proud of, or about having some sort of impact in the world, I think is a really interesting question. Something that someone once shared with me, which I thought was kind of interesting, is you can sometimes look at people who do found businesses, and one thing that perhaps they all carry, and I'd say it's true in my experience, is this sort of dissatisfaction or slight irritation with the way the world is, and this constant drive to change it or make it different in some way. And I massively relate to that. That desire to constantly make things a bit better, or to drive things forwards in a way. And I guess you could call that ambition. I guess for me it's a question of is it ambition for self, or is it ambition for the world, or is it ambition for others? I think it's a really interesting question. Anthony,
I'm going to chip in there because I hope I'm not going to throw too much of a curveball on this, but it's I was on a friend's Zoom call a few weeks ago. One of my friends was celebrating quite a big birthday, and the discussion got to a particular individual and saying, "Oh, aren't they successful? God, look how successful that person is." And it was based on the job that they were doing and ultimately how much money they were being paid, because somebody had found out how much they were being paid, and immediately everybody, and I could see, because immediately, you know what I'm like, I'm looking at everybody on the call and everyone's nodding apart from me. And it kind of aligns to me. It's like, well, what does success mean to you? And what's ambition to you? And what lies behind that ambition? Because I think, you may earn £15,000 a year, but you could be successful, right? Because you're actually achieving what it is that you set out to achieve. And so I think there's a number of things. I think one is that we live in a society where a lot of people are judging success and high levels of ambition by how much people earn. And I like, if that's what you set out to do and that's what you want to be, great, go for it. But that's not what's driving everybody. So I suppose the long-winded way of making my point is that what's driving the ambition? What is it that you want? And I suppose if you don't have that thing, then maybe if you don't have a big goal, or you don't have something you're driving towards, then you don't have ambition. But for me, I'm always looking at saying, what is it you want? And what's the emotion behind that? Because you get the emotion behind it, you understand what it is that's driving you towards that, you'll be successful. Alex, you want to come in there?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I think, what is it? That's the key. I think a lot of people don't know what they want. When you're saying, what is it you want? I think a lot of people, what they think they want and what they actually want can be very different. And to me, with this whole ambition thing, when I thought, I want to chuck this out to talk about this week, maybe my thought, maybe my parting comment on this section was, are founders only limited by their own ambition? And
very interesting.
That's it from me.
Very good. Well, I think it's It's a wonderful topic, isn't it? And I think, I remember once hearing a founder talk about, are you someone who wants a quiet life? And I think most founders I know, the answer is a resounding no. If you want a quiet life, probably don't be a founder. I think that may be my experience. But gentlemen, thank you. What a fascinating sharing of ideas and concepts. And I do hope if you've been listening to this, something there gave you some inspiration. And if it did, please do let us know, because we love to hear the stories about what people have taken from these podcasts that we're sharing. So if you have any stories to share, please do let us know. Equally, we would love if anyone's listening to this, please do feel free to give us feedback and reviews on iTunes. We're delighted to have our first few reviews up, and people seem to be enjoying what we're doing, which is going to help us find the motivation to keep doing it, because we very much enjoy sharing this with you, and we'd love to continue. So, gentlemen, I guess it remains to say, what do we do after the Blitz? Well, it depends on how you've come through it. We have to remember that the world and our businesses are probably a little bit better than we think they are, but let's not be blind to the truth. And and where the hell are we going? Do we bet it all over again? Stick it on the roulette wheel? Or is there some other way that we're going to create the future that we're trying to create? So it remains me to say a huge thank you to Mr. Anthony Enright.
Thank you, Ben.
Equally substantial thank you to Mr. Alex Moore.
Thank you for listening.
And I've been Ben Thomas. We're Atomics, and this has been Founder Hacks. Thank you very much indeed for listening.